Up next, a restaurant robbery goes wrong.
There was no reason for this to happen, Stephen.
And this was a vicious, vicious attack.
And the evidence is contradictory.
There was somebody else bleeding at the scene of the crime.
That blood and the partial fingerprint were all investigators had.
I wasn't holding my breath for any real results.
Until the money trail provides investigators with a vital clue. Jennifer Holmes remembers Super Bowl Sunday 2001 for one reason. It was the day she first met her husband. They were both at the same Super Bowl party.
And I saw him sitting there with perfect hair and his leather jacket, perfect smile. So he stood there and he's like, "Hi, I'm Stephen." He's like, "Hi, I'm Jen."
A year later, the two were married. And 29-year-old Stephen became a father to Jennifer's young son. They also had plans to have children of their own.
As far as his career, I noticed this about him. He was always happiest when he was working in a restaurant.
Stephen was an assistant manager of a steakhouse in St. Petersburg, Florida. He often worked long hours, and some nights were longer than others.
He called me at 10:18 and said, "I'm just letting you know I'm going to be later tonight because we had a late party and I just closed up. I just let everyone out and locked the door."
Around midnight, an exterminator entered the restaurant with his own key.
That is when he saw the bloody footprints and he saw and found Mr. Holmes' lifeless body.
Stephen Holmes had been stabbed to death.
I've never seen a crime scene this horrific. It was a pretty bad scene.
In a clear case of overkill, Stephen was stabbed more than 40 times.
When you think of a murder, you sometimes think, okay, somebody is shot or maybe they're stabbed. I mean, this was a vicious, vicious attack. He was almost decapitated.
It's not something that should happen to our son. It's what? No, you can't believe. You just can't believe that it's happening.
Robbery appeared to be the motive. About $8,000 was missing from the safe in the manager's office. This was much more than usual because the restaurant had been promoting $100 gift certificates as Christmas presents that evening.
It's at a restaurant. You're in the month of December. Generally speaking, a fairly busy time of the year. So we'd all pieced together that that's what the motive was.
The exterminator who found the body was the first and most obvious suspect, but was quickly written off.
Due to his demeanor, how he looked, and not having any signs of violence or blood on his person, they could see that he was nowhere near involved in this case.
Fortunately for police, the restaurant had several surveillance cameras.
When we saw the camera was present in the hallway, our initial reaction was that we may very well have not only the attack on video, but at least a starting point of how the suspect was built and his race.
But there was an immediate setback. All the cameras were hooked to a single video recorder, and it was gone.
The entire VCR the cords were actually cut and removed from the office.
There were no signs of forced entry. Was it possible that a customer hid in the restaurant until closing time in preparation for the robbery?
There's no reason to believe that the criminal might not have gone back to the restroom and hid in the bathroom until after they closed. You know, closed the stall, hid on top of the toilet, that sort of thing.
If the killer was a customer, that meant dozens, if not hundreds, of potential suspects. Friends, family, and co-workers had difficulty understanding why Stephen Holmes had been murdered. The restaurant had never been robbed before and was located in a low-crime area.
Robberies usually don't result in this type of repeated violence. Very rarely in armed robberies does the victim sustain this many injuries.
Stephen's best friend and co-worker Wilson Santillo was among the first to offer his condolences.
I heard wailing. I came inside and it was Wilson in the living room crying. My wife consoled him and, grabbed his shoulders and just said, think about Stephen's smile and he would forgive whoever did this. And I think he started wailing more.
The day after Stephen Holmes' murder, a man working across the street from the crime scene contacted police.
This individual indicated that a white pickup truck with a horizontal stripe along the side of it raced out of the Durango's parking lot prior to the police arriving.
The witness said this happened at about 11 o'clock, just after the time police believe Stephen was killed.
The description was so detailed. I mean, a loud muffler, stripes on the side, a small pickup, white. I mean, it was a very clear description of what type of a vehicle it was.
For 2 days, police officers stopped dozens of trucks that fit the description, checking the interiors for blood and the drivers for any fresh wounds. Then, they got a devastating setback. The witness now said he made the whole thing up.
He was trying to score points with his girlfriend, is what it basically boiled down to. He might have been a brick short, too. That's a week's worth of work. And it's down the tubes, and it's very disappointing.
As family and friends mourned Stephen Holmes, police wondered who would want him dead.
Nobody who knew him, as far as I was concerned at that time, could have hurt him, especially like that.
We'd interviewed a lot of his friends, a lot of family members, some coworkers. You could not find a single person that would say anything bad about him.
Defensive wounds showed Stephen fought his attacker to the end.
He had over 24 defensive wounds, I believe, and 20 wounds to his neck and his face. It was obvious it was a very big struggle.
Part of the struggle started inside the kitchen area, and it made its way down that small hallway into the doorway of the office. And then right there in the office is where the final struggle took place.
It appeared Stephen tried to make it into his office and shut the door. There were actually stab marks on the door.
There was a large concentration of blood on that door. There was a huge amount of blood on the floor. The victim very well may have slipped on his own blood.
There were dozens of footprints made by the killer. Unfortunately, there were no clear impressions for comparison.
It was someone that may have had a pair of galoshes or boots, the cleanup type boots, handy, or actually had them on at the time they left the murder scene.
But it appeared the killer left evidence as he removed the surveillance equipment.
The suspect had to actually step over the victim that he had just killed. The VCR was up off the counter area of the desk. I believe that the suspect utilized part of that desk to reach up to get the VCR and cut the cord and take the VCR.
On the floor underneath that shelf, investigators saw a manila folder. When they turned it over, they found something.
We looked at it closer and we actually noticed the fingerprint in blood. Myself and Mr. Carlisle looked at each other and said, "We got him."
Was it possible the killer accidentally knocked it onto the floor as he was stealing the security system VCR?
The folder, the fingerprint wasn't face up, so the person who, as they were leaving, probably wouldn't have known that they had left that essential piece of evidence.
But it was a partial print and badly smudged.
The technician and I were going back and forth, and I'm like, well, I think I can use it, but let's see if we can make it just a little bit better, and handed it back to him.
But enhancing it would come at a price.
That would actually destroy the DNA profile of the blood that the fingerprint was left in.
Investigators decided the risk was worth it. The print was sprayed with amido black, a chemical dye that reacts with the proteins in blood.
He worked on it a little bit more, and we decided that was as good as the print was going to get.
The result was the partial print of a fingertip. Investigators entered the print into the nationwide fingerprint database of known criminal offenders, and the result was bad news.
I did do an APHIS search. I was not able to come up with the match.
That's because the print didn't have enough points of comparison for the computer to process. With no print match and now no DNA, investigators were no closer to solving this murder.
It's a situation where you basically take a deep breath and keep on swimming.
In an attempt to find Stephen Holmes' killer, investigators wanted to make sure they identified every piece of potential evidence in the restaurant. The murder took place in Stephen's office in the back, but investigators noticed small circular blood drops on the counter near the sink in the kitchen.
It was obviously close to the crime scene, but far enough away that we were hoping that that was in fact the suspect's blood.
Blood tests revealed it did not belong to the victim, Stephen Holmes.
Somebody had to be standing over the table and blood dripped off of him onto the table.
But if the blood was the perpetrator's, why was it there and why didn't he clean it up? These almost perfectly round blood drops, called passive drops, were made by someone standing still, possibly while washing his hands at the sink.
A lot of times in a knife fight like that, the knife may slip out of his hand and cut his finger or something similar to that effect.
The blood DNA was possible evidence, but investigators had no one to compare it to. With no sign of forced entry, the killer could have been an employee. So investigators asked restaurant employees for DNA samples and their fingerprints. They also wanted to see if anyone had cuts or bruises on their hands.
They say, you know what? Let's bring all the employees in and let's fingerprint everybody. At least if we do that, maybe we can rule everybody out with the fingerprint that we've got now.
But as police were fingerprinting the employees, they didn't notice any with visible injuries.
Authorities are thinking, the killer's probably not here. He's probably not an employee.
It was basically something that had to be done to further the investigation, but I wasn't holding my breath for any real results.
Nevertheless, each employee was fingerprinted carefully.
This would be the front of the finger, but the print I had was more off to the side. So in order to make sure I got the area I needed, I had to fully roll each and every finger of each and every employee.
And in a shocking development, the print on the manila folder matched the last person anyone expected, especially Stephen Holmes's family. It belonged to Wilson Santil, Stephen's best friend, the restaurant's maintenance man and prep cook. Stephen's family couldn't believe it, since the two often worked late together.
Stephen would bring in CDs specifically that he knew was the type of music that Wilson liked so that they could put them in and it would go through the whole store and they could be listening to that music while they were working.
Wilson Santil went to the ceremonies to honor the deceased. He hugged family members, cried when it appeared to be appropriate. There was no flight issues. There was no obvious signs that we needed to suspect him of anything.
But investigators naturally went further, comparing Santil's DNA to the blood droplets on the kitchen counter and faucet.
Those 6 foreign male DNA profiles found at the scene did match the suspect in the case.
The 51-year-old Haitian national was arrested on suspicion of murder.
You have anything to say at all?
They got the wrong guy. That's what
They got the wrong guy?
Yes.
You didn't kill Stephen Holmes?
I don't.
You don't know anything about it?
Steve was my good friend.
Although Santil's blood and fingerprint were both at the scene, police had a problem. There was a plausible explanation for his blood to be at the sink in the kitchen.
The defense is pretty clear. He's a maintenance worker. He's a prep cook. People cut themselves all the time.
And there was no proof Santil's fingerprint was in Stephen's blood. It could have been there previously.
So you find a fingerprint of my client here, of Wilson Santil, inside the restaurant. What's the big deal?
Needing more, investigators looked into a possible motive. Why would Wilson Santil want to kill a man he called his friend?
People thought that Wilson was a hardworking guy. Good family man, good father.
Until a background check revealed a secret past.
Why was your bloody fingerprint at the scene?
It's not I don't have no blood in my Steve.
He was your friend?
Yes, he's my best friend.
Wilson Santil insisted he had nothing to do with Stephen Holmes' murder. The father of three was active in his church and well-liked by his co-workers. He even considered the victim his best friend. But a background check revealed Santil had a violent past. 20 years earlier, Santil served 4 years in prison for aggravated assault and concealing a weapon. And despite working 3 jobs, he had money problems.
He was paying child support, from what I understand, for 2 different children. And the amount, when I add it up now, it's probably the amount's like $700 or $800 a month. It was quite a large sum of money.
The forensic evidence clearly pointed to Wilson Santil as the man who killed Stephen Holmes inside the steak restaurant. But investigators wanted to know what happened to the $8,000 missing from the restaurant's safe. That's when they learned that Santil visited a local furniture store the day after the murder. The furniture store had a security camera in the office, which showed Santil paying off a $1,200 debt in cash with $100 bills. Much of the money stolen from the restaurant was in $100 bills from the gift certificates they'd been selling on the night of the murder.
We know that there are $100 bills that are stolen. The fact that he pays off this debt at this furniture rental company so quickly after the murder is... it's just bizarre.
And forensic testing found a connection between Santil's fingerprint in Stephen's office and his blood drops near the sink.
You had feet print leading to the manager's office, and you had shoe prints leading from the office to the kitchen.
Now the case is coming full circle.
Prosecutors believe Wilson Santil was desperate for money and believed his only recourse was to rob the restaurant where he worked. As the maintenance man, he stopped by after hours, knowing the cash receipts would be in the safe. Santil probably made some noise in the kitchen. Stephen walked out of his office to see who was there.
No? No? No?
That's when Stephen saw the knife. Stephen ran to his office and tried to close the door, but Santil was still able to get inside. Stephen was stabbed more than 40 times and died in his office. As Santil washed his hands and the knife, his blood, possibly from a bloody nose from the fight, dropped onto the kitchen counter and faucet. Santil took the $8,000 from the safe. Since he knew the surveillance cameras had captured the fight, he cut the cables and removed the video recorder. But as he did, he left his partial fingerprint on the manila folder, which fell to the floor upside down. Santil left the restaurant with the murder weapon, video recorder, and his bloody clothes. Prosecutors believe he returned later to clean up the blood. But his plan fell apart when he saw the exterminator was there on an unscheduled visit.
Nobody knew he was coming by that night, except for Stephen. I feel that was a godsend.
Stephen's the only person that knows that this guy is showing up. And again, thank God that he shows up on that night, because that narrows the timeline, that preserves the crime scene at that point, and that prevents Wilson Santil from coming back and cleaning up the crime scene.
When Stephen's family learned that Wilson Santil murdered their son, they were shocked and angry because it was Santil who came to their home hours after Stephen's murder to offer his condolences.
To listen to all the lies and then to know that he came here, it's just, complete disbelief.
When we found out later it was him, it's a weird feeling that he had the nerve to come here to our home to see. It's still hard to comprehend that.
Wilson Santil was tried and convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Santil left evidence behind. Some he might have explained, having worked there as an employee, but not all of it.
I think forensic science is amazing. That's what solved the case. It just puts that much more of my faith in the system, and I'm glad that it's progressed to where it has, and I hope it continues to do so.
Forensic science in this particular case is 110%. It's the reason Wilson Santil is in prison, and without it, he would be a free man today.
Up next, the murder of a convenience store employee goes unsolved for years.
The case always bugged me. We wanted to find the clown that did that.
Police couldn't understand why the victim's husband didn't report her missing.
Every time I hear, I didn't call it in because we had an argument, I always wonder, how can anyone believe this?
Could new forensic testing solve a 20-year-old case?
You got to treat every single case like it's the crime of the century.
When Rod and Julie Estes started their life together in Jacksonville, Florida, as husband and wife, they had to figure out, like most couples, how to support themselves. Rod drove a truck for a plastics company. But the only job 21-year-old Julie could find was working the late shift at a convenience store near their home.
She had graduated from high school, but she was a recent transplant to the Jacksonville area and needed that job to put food on her table.
Convenience stores and gas stations were really the only things at night that were open that people would rob.
I imagine sitting in that convenience store without any kind of modern-day surveillance or protection or panic button, that she must have been fearful.
Julie normally worked afternoons and evenings and closed the store at 11 p.m. But one night, a customer noticed the store was closed at 10:30, a half hour earlier than the closing time posted on the door. Police were asked to check it out.
We shined our lights in the windows. There was absolutely no signs of foul play. Nothing was disrupted. Nothing was overturned. It just looked like somebody left the store. So we went back to work and went about our normal shift.
The next morning, the daytime clerk opened the store and discovered it had been robbed.
The floor safe had been open and appeared to be empty, and that the power appeared to have been cut off the night before.
According to the owners, around $500 was missing from the safe. Police tried to find Julie, but she wasn't home. Surprisingly, Julie's husband said she never came home from work, and he admitted he hadn't reported her missing.
He told me at that time that they had had a small argument before she left for work. And I'm like, well, you didn't call the police when she didn't come home for, 8 hours?
Every time I hear that story of somebody saying, I didn't call it in because we had an argument, I always wonder, how can anyone believe this?
Later that morning, 4 miles from the convenience store, police found Julie's car in the woods, stuck in mud. The key was still in the ignition.
One of our helicopters spotted a blue Camaro, not a long distance away, but in a wooded area that's known for vehicles dumped or parked or whatever out there.
They saw what they perceived to be drag marks leading away from the vehicle, and then they followed the drag marks.
A few hundred feet from the car, under some cardboard, was Julie's body.
Julie's body was found with her arms tied behind her back with her very own shoelaces. Her shirt was pulled up with her breasts exposed. Her pants and panties were pulled down to her socks.
The details of the crime just really go right through you. They make you realize how much she really went through.
Here was a 21-year-old woman who on one hand wore a high school class ring, on the other one her wedding ring.
Julie's husband said he had an alibi, one police had heard dozens of times over the years.
Rod Estes had explained that he was by himself all evening, had watched a football game, and had fallen asleep. And no one was with him all night.
Not the best alibi in the world if a policeman thinks you might be responsible for your wife's disappearance, but it's all he had.
And investigators had another problem. They suspected Julie had been murdered elsewhere. As investigators searched for Julie Estes' killer, they began by looking for clues inside her car, which was found stuck in mud in the woods near her body. And the evidence told a story.
Julie herself was a tall girl. She was approximately 5'8", 5'9". The seat had been moved all the way up as if a shorter person had been driving it. So it was apparent that someone other than Julie had been the last person to drive that car. And in fact, that person probably was shorter.
And they also found blood drops in the trunk. Tests showed it was the same blood type as Julie's, an indication she was injured elsewhere, placed in the trunk, then driven to the woods.
Initially, they weren't sure whether that was the scene of the murder or that was simply a dump site.
That type of development makes investigation that much more difficult because now you've got two crime scenes to worry about.
Unfortunately, there were no foreign fingerprints found on or in the car. And investigators found no usable footprints in the mud and dirt. Julie's purse was discovered at the scene with no money inside. The convenience store's money bag was there, but it too was empty. Julie's killer had removed the laces from her shoes to tie her hands, but her shoes were missing.
Julie's shoes were distinctive even back in 1985 because they were purple.
The next day, investigators got a potential lead.
Police got a call from a man who'd been kind of scrounging around behind another convenience store when he came upon a purple pair of shoes.
The purple shoes were almost certainly Julie's. The laces were missing. A bowling bag and some receipts with Julie's name left no doubt the items were hers. The site was just a half-mile from the convenience store where Julie was last seen alive.
We found evidence that things were taken out of the trunk of her car. She was probably forced into the trunk. Then she was driven 5 or 6 miles away from there where her body was found.
Normally, the evidentiary value of the items would be significant, but not this time.
The civilian that had found those items had at first taken them home.
This meant all the evidence at what may have been the murder site was compromised.
Somebody's been there moving things around, and it just makes the investigation a lot more difficult.
There was no physical evidence that at that particular time that could identify a killer.
In the meantime, it didn't take long for investigators to eliminate Julie's husband as a suspect.
When he was perfectly willing to take a polygraph examination, kept in contact with the officers trying to work this case, I think all suspicion was erased.
But Julie's autopsy did provide some important information about the killer. The medical examiner found evidence of sexual assault. A rape test kit recovered biological evidence, presumably of the perpetrator. Unfortunately, DNA testing wasn't yet available.
Crimes in 1985 were a lot harder to solve just based on technology. There are just certain things that we could yield DNA profiles from today you wouldn't be able to get back then.
As the weeks went by and the number of leads started to dwindle, investigators continued to search for Julie's killer, knowing full well they had no forensic evidence to identify him. But it didn't stop them from trying.
At this particular time, when this incident occurred, some weird things were happening in that area.
7 months before Julie's murder, the body of a missing 15-year-old girl was discovered just 3 miles away. Her body was so badly decomposed. The cause of death couldn't be determined. And 2 months before Julie's murder, a 10-year-old girl was found dead, hanging in a tree in the woods just 2 miles from Julie's convenience store. Since these crimes happened within a radius of only 3 miles, investigators had a hunch they might be connected.
We were going to want to find the clown that did that.
Investigators wondered whether Julie Estes' murder might be connected to several other crimes committed in the area. Unfortunately, investigators had no evidence to link them.
Right now, by today's standard, physical evidence is one of your top factors in reviewing a case. It's very significant, very important. They make the case.
With no leads, no evidence, and no suspects, the trail of Julie Estes' killer turned cold. Julie's family started to believe her murder would never be solved.
After a couple of years, I just gave up. I said, well, we're up here and they're down there, and, nobody cares.
The case always bugged me, She went missing on my watch. And it bugged me. I mean, every time I drove by that store, I thought of her. And it bugged me.
After a few years, Patrolman Frank Mackesy was promoted to Chief of Detectives with the power to recommend cases to the Cold Case Unit.
Mackesy had always had a strong desire to solve this case. This is a case that had stuck with him and stuck in his mind through his whole career.
So when the Cold Case Unit got involved, they broadened their search. They looked at every sexually motivated crime in the region and got a break. Just 2 months after Julie Estes' murder, 30 miles away in another jurisdiction, there had been another convenience store crime, almost identical to Julie's, except in this case, the victim survived. A 19-year-old convenience store worker, Carla Nobles, had just closed the store and given a ride to a young man she met in the parking lot.
She voluntarily let him in the car, having no idea what he was capable of. She did a quick drive to the post office where he said he wanted to go.
Before they got there, the man pulled a knife, forced her to drive to an isolated field, and sexually assaulted her. He then forced her to drive away. She was sure he was going to kill her because she could identify him. But then she saw the only chance to escape, a police officer directing traffic.
What are you doing? Stop! Hey! Stop the knife!
And she just literally tries to run up there and get the officer's attention, practically hitting the officer.
When he got to the car, the abductor had a knife to Carla's throat. And so he pulled his revolver and the abductor dropped the knife.
The man was identified as James Ellman. He was convicted for the crime and was currently serving a 22-year sentence in a nearby prison. And cold case investigators learned another startling coincidence. Ellman had a close connection to the 10-year-old girl found hanging in the tree near Julie's store 2 months before Julie's murder.
The 10-year-old was a half-sister of Ellman.
Investigators now wanted to test the biological evidence collected from Julie's rape test kit to see whether James Ellman was her killer. But there was a risk. The test would consume all of the evidence.
Unfortunately, sometimes you have to make a choice. You might have to run the entire bit of sample, but at the time, you're thinking this is the best technology available.
Investigators decided the gamble was worth it.
They consumed all of the semen that was contained in those slides, trying to get results. Results that, unfortunately, never showed who the killer was.
This was a devastating setback.
It's just shocking. It feels like you're hit with a ton of bricks. Then you got to start over. It's like starting from scratch again.
But investigators refused to give up.
Ellman has a rough history, and people around James Ellman tend to die.
Unfortunately, if Ellman was Julie's killer, there was no longer any DNA to prove it.
They used up all the evidence and found nothing that brought them any closer to a suspect.
After years of searching for Julie Estes' killer, investigators were convinced they found him. He was serving time in prison for a similar crime committed 30 miles away. His name was James Ellman.
Ellman was the worst of the worst. We talk about he's the poster child of antisocial. It's a clue when the public defenders are afraid of him, when the doctors are afraid of him, when the people at the medical treatment facility are afraid of him.
But investigators wanted to be sure Ellman was responsible for Julie Estes' murder. Why? Because if he wasn't, Julie's killer was still on the loose.
No, it's not always a Hollywood ending. Sometimes you don't get any results. Cases still go unsolved.
So, 16 years after Julie's murder, the Jacksonville Police Department sent Julie's clothes to the U.S. Army Crime Lab in Forest Park, Georgia, one of the most sophisticated labs available.
The item's evidence included socks and her shirt and jeans, as well as other items from her sexual assault kit, which included like fingernail scrapings and other swabs.
Scientists there were discouraged. All but one of the items had been analyzed and tested.
The socks had never been tested, probably because nobody expected to find anything useful on them.
The idea that forensic evidence could have transferred onto Julie's socks was remote. Nevertheless, analyst Brian Higgins examined the socks with light sources that cause genetic material to fluoresce.
I was kind of like, wow, could these be actually semen stains? I was kind of surprised, actually, because it's not one of the more common places we would find semen.
The areas were removed, then analyzed with a new DNA test that needed only a very small amount of genetic material.
When DNA first started out, you needed a lot of DNA, and it needed to be high-quality DNA. Nowadays, it can be very degraded, and we get very limited quantities and still yield good results.
Miraculously, the test generated a mixture of two DNA profiles, one female and one male. One was Julie's DNA. The other was the DNA of the killer.
They were able to identify that DNA profile as the exact match to James Ellman.
We were all ecstatic. I mean, it was an unbelievable feeling. And that's the reward of cold case, when you have that piece that you never had before, and you're able just to put that one thing together, and you've got the entire case.
Investigators confronted Ellman in prison with the evidence.
And I'm telling you that your DNA, that your semen is in the murder scene of this murdered girl.
I'm telling you, I wasn't there. I don't know anything about this girl.
If you're not there, how does James Ellman's semen get in the damn crime scene?
How do you know it's mine? How do you know you're gonna take something that's 20 years ago from my refrigerator and take my blood today and then match it to that?
Yes.
Okay.
Forensics can do
I
that.
can understand all that. But what makes you think that semen is mine?
James Ellman is a monster that now sits behind bars.
I always knew that there was going to be a day that they were going to say, we got it. This case is solved.
DNA evidence. Prosecutors believe James Ellman was probably walking by the convenience store where Julie Estes worked around 10:30 and noticed there were no customers inside. He shut off the store's electricity, held Julie at knife point, forced her to open the safe. Then, he made her drive a half-mile away to an area behind an unoccupied store. He used her shoelaces to tie her wrists, then raped and killed her. He removed items from Julie's trunk to make room for her body. Elman drove to the woods, where he hid her body under some cardboard. The biological evidence from the attack was embedded in her cotton socks. Elman probably wanted to keep Julie's car, but it got stuck in the mud, and he had to escape on foot. Authorities had plenty of suspicion, but no evidence to charge Elman with his half-sister's murder. But after 17 years, there was plenty of DNA evidence to charge him with Julie Estes' rape and murder.
It just was unbelievable that it would be the socks that would hold the true identity of her killer.
And how would you want me to say? Would you really want me to say?
I guess I just asked for an explanation. I mean, you know how forensics works.
I can't give it to you.
Well, the only reasonable explanation is that you're involved in the murder.
No, that's not true. That's not true. That's definitely not true.
Faced with a possible death penalty, Elman decided to plead no contest to Julie Estes' rape and murder. In return, he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
The lesson for criminals would be no matter how long ago you did the crime, the forensics has a capability of solving it.
If it wasn't for forensics in this case, the DNA and everything, I don't think that they would ever solve it.
We always talked about if we ever got out, we were just going to we would be counting bodies. We believed he was that bad.
You got to treat every single case like it's the crime of the century. And what I mean by that is you got to make sure.
Before we get back to the episode, if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to tap 5 stars. It's one of the easiest ways to support Forensic Tales and helps the show reach new listeners. Thank you so much for being here.
To get this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out at patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
A terrified taxi driver races through the streets of Bali. The cab screeches to a halt, and the driver runs into the police station. The words are rushing out of his mouth. The police calm the man down, and he points them to the trunk of his cab. Police officers open the trunk, their eyes on a mysterious suitcase. As they open the suitcase, their hearts stop. It's a badly beaten, half-naked, dead lady stuffed inside a suitcase. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 120, The Heather Mack Story. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell Areola. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast covering real, spine-tingling stories with a forensic science twist. Some cases have been solved with forensic science, while others have turned cold. Every remarkable story sends us a chilling reminder that not all stories have happy endings. Sharing true crime stories isn't just about the story themselves. It's about getting justice for the victims and their families. As a one-woman show, your support helps me find new exciting cases, conduct in-depth, fact-based research, produce and edit this weekly show. For supporting the show, you'll get early ad-free access to weekly episodes, exclusive merchandise not available anywhere else, bonus content, shout-outs in episodes, and priority on case suggestions. To learn more about supporting Forensic Tales, consider visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/Forensic Tales, or by simply clicking the support link in the show notes. You can also help support the show by leaving a positive rating with a review. Now, let's jump right into this week's story. On the morning of August 12, 2014, travelers staying at the St. Regis Bali Resort in Nusa Dua, Bali, were preparing to start their days. The 5-star Marriott Resort attracts travelers from all over the world looking to stay in luxury. The resort is centrally located and overlooks the most beautiful beaches in this part of Bali. The St. Regis Bali Resort offers its guests fancy rooms, private villas, high-class dining, and direct access to its white sandy beaches or saltwater lagoons. Reservations here can range anywhere from $500 a night all the way up to $7,000. St. Regis guarantees its guests an exceptional stay regardless of the room type, making it a trendy spot in this part of Bali. August 14th, 2014 started like any other day at the hotel. Guests arrived to begin their stays, while other guests checked out. At the front of the hotel, taxis lined up across the driveway, prepared to take guests to the airport or into town. A typical sight for most busy hotels that attract a lot of tourists. But for one particular taxi cab driver, this was anything but your typical morning. While sitting outside the St. Regis, a young couple flagged him down for a ride. Once they had the driver's attention, they put a suitcase in the back trunk and 2 other bags in the back seat. They told the taxi cab driver that they would be right back. Then they turned around and went back inside the hotel. The taxi driver thought maybe the couple simply forgot something, went back to their room to go get it, and then would come down in a few minutes. But the minutes grew into hours and still no sign of the couple. After about 2 hours of waiting, the driver became annoyed. What's taking them so long? It's a busy morning, and a long line of hotel guests are waiting to get a taxi. Not only do hotel guests have to wait, but he's also losing money by just waiting for this couple to come back. So growing more and more impatient with the situation, the taxi cab driver decided to walk into the hotel and try to find the couple. He saw them walk out of the hotel with the suitcases, so he figured that they were staying at the St. Regis. The driver spoke with a couple of the hotel's employees and found out who the suitcases belonged to and the couple's room number. The hotel employees went to check on the couple, but they were gone. The room was completely empty. Even more annoyed by the situation, the taxi cab driver went back out to his taxi. As he stood by the side of his car, trying to figure out what to do with the bags, he saw something unusual. He thought he saw something coming out of the trunk. When he got closer to the trunk, he saw red liquid leaking from something inside. Blood. He popped the trunk and saw a suitcase leaking more blood. The taxi driver quickly shut his trunk and ran to the driver's side door. He opened the door, got inside, and drove to the local police station. He had no idea what was inside the suitcase, and he didn't want to find out. So instead of opening it, he let the police do it instead. As soon as he arrived at the police station, he told officers that he noticed blood leaking from the trunk while standing in front of the St. Regis. And then, when he opened the trunk, there was a bloody suitcase inside. He told the officers that a couple hailed him down in front of the St. Regis and put the suitcase in the trunk and then put 2 other bags in the back seat. After putting the bags inside his car, he said they turned around and went back inside the hotel. The police officers tell the driver to go wait in an interview room at the station while they open his trunk. When they opened it, they saw a hard shell gray piece of luggage. Inside the bag, they made a horrific discovery. Inside was the body of a badly beaten adult female wrapped in a bloody bedsheet. She was left half naked with massive wounds to her head. The victim was identified as 62-year-old Sheila Vaughn Weissmack. Now that name might sound familiar because Sheila was the former wife of the famous jazz musician and composer James L. Mack. James Mack was recognized for working with well-known jazz musicians and symphonies in Chicago, Illinois, as well as internationally. Now, I say former wife because James Mack died in August 2009 while vacationing in Greece with his wife Sheila and their younger daughter. James was found dead inside their hotel room from a pulmonary embolism. He was only 76 years old. But that's not when James's health troubles began. Before his sudden death in 2009, James Mack suffered a terrible foot injury while on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship in the Mediterranean with Sheila. James didn't receive proper medical treatment because the ship was at sea. Unfortunately, the lack of appropriate medical treatment led to partial paralysis in James's foot. After the trip, James and Sheila sued the Royal Caribbean Cruise Ship Company. In the lawsuit, they argued that because the ship's doctors failed to treat James properly, he was left with partial paralysis. The lawsuit went back and forth in the courts for the next 10 years. Before the case was settled, James died in 2009. He died without finding out the outcome of the lawsuit. In 2011, a settlement between Royal Caribbean and now James's former wife Sheila was reached. Because James was dead, Sheila was entitled to the payment. After everything was said and done and the legal fees were paid, Royal Caribbean was ordered to pay Sheila $340,000, and another $500,000 was awarded to James Mack's estate. 5 years after James's death, Sheila was now dead. But why was she found half naked and badly beaten inside a Bali taxicab? And who could have done this to her? Bali forensic expert Ida Bagus Puto Elite told reporters for People magazine that they found many signs of a struggle across her body. According to Elite, Sheila had massive bruising to her arms and some on her fingers had been broken, which indicated to forensic experts that Sheila put up a fight against her attacker. Besides the defensive wounds, she was also hit in the face and head multiple times with a blunt object. Simply put, Sheila's killer beat her to death. After discovering Sheila's body, the Bali police quickly got to work on identifying possible suspects. The brutality of the crime and the attempt to cover it up suggested to investigators that this was a personal killing. Sheila likely knew her killer. Within hours, the Bali police got a massive lead in the case. They learned from the St. Regis Hotel that Sheila booked a room with her daughter, 18-year-old Heather Mack. Sheila and Heather booked the room for 10 nights while they vacationed together in Bali. The plan was for the mother-daughter duo to spend some quality time together. The Bali police wanted to speak with Heather as soon as possible. They knew talking to her would be their best shot at figuring out who could have done this to Sheila. But tracking down Heather wasn't as easy as they thought. When the police looked for Heather in their room at the St. Regis, she was nowhere to be found. The room was left almost empty. But they learned something interesting from the hotel employees. The staff told the police that a young man who was also staying with them. At first, the police thought, that's a little strange. Sheila and Heather are the only two guests registered in the room, so who is this mystery guy? A manager for the St. Regis told the police that a second hotel room had been reserved with Sheila's credit card. With this new information, they decided to also search Sheila's cell phone and bank account records. And that's when they made another intriguing discovery. They discovered that besides the second hotel room at the St. Regis, a business class airline ticket had recently been purchased using Sheila's credit card. It was a one-way ticket from Chicago to Bali. The ticket was in the name of 21-year-old Tommy Schaefer. Bali police quickly find out that Tommy Schaefer is Heather's boyfriend. So now they're looking for two people, Heather and Tommy. Less than 48 hours after discovering Sheila's body stuffed inside a suitcase, the Bali police tracked down her daughter Heather and her boyfriend Tommy Schaefer. They found the couple about a mile away from the St. Regis in a budget hotel near the international airport in Bali. Hotel employees told the police that they were suspicious of the couple immediately after checking in without any luggage or bags. They alerted the authorities after Tommy requested a voucher from the front desk to use the internet. The hunt for the couple was broadcast across the local news, and the hotel staff made the connection and positively identified Tommy. The hotel then immediately contacted the police. The police immediately began questioning the couple about Sheila's murder. Heather and Tommy deny having anything to do with Sheila's murder. In fact, they had quite the story to tell. Heather and Tommy tell Bali police an armed gang attacked them along with Sheila. A gang killed Sheila and stuffed her body in a suitcase. And the reason why they left the St. Regis was because they were scared that they would become next, so they ran away. Well, the Bali police didn't exactly buy into this story. They had already seen CCTV footage taken of Sheila and Heather arguing in the hotel's lobby the day before Sheila was found dead. Although it was unclear what exactly they were arguing about, according to the police, the video clearly shows that they're arguing, and they also had eyewitnesses who told the police that they saw Heather and Tommy put the suitcases in the taxi at the St. Regis. So they were both taken into custody without any formal criminal charges being filed. Under Indonesian law, they can be held up to 24 hours before being named as suspects in the murder. But it wouldn't take the police long to pursue murder charges. On August 15, 2014, 3 days after finding Sheila's body, Indonesian police formally designated Heather and Tommy as prisoners connected to the murder. Under Indonesian law, this meant that they were under arrest and that it was up to the state prosecution's office to decide whether or not to charge them. While authorities took Heather to jail, she dropped a bombshell. She told the police that they should be careful with her because she was pregnant with Tommy's baby. Once in custody, the authorities ordered a forensic evaluation for Heather. They wanted to find out if maybe Heather was somehow mentally unstable. It could explain why she murdered her mother in such a violent way. But all of the forensic tests came back normal. They didn't find any signs of mental illness or any insight into a possible motive. When Heather was detained, she told the police that she was pregnant with an ectopic pregnancy, which might not show up on your typical over-the-counter pregnancy test. So authorities performed an ultrasound and urine test. Initially, the Bali police thought that maybe Heather was making up being pregnant so that they wouldn't take her to jail. But both ultrasound and the urine test confirmed that she was telling the truth. She was, in fact, pregnant with Tommy's baby. The story about an 18-year-old girl and her boyfriend killing her mother while on vacation and then stuffing her body in a suitcase quickly made international news. Overnight, people worldwide knew the names Heather Mack and Tommy Schaefer. And they became known as Bali's Bonnie and Clyde after a possible motive for the murder surfaced. The media began speculating that Heather and Tommy killed Sheila because she wouldn't let them be together, or she wasn't happy about the pregnancy. So the only way to be together and to have this baby together was to kill Sheila. In the days following their designations as prisoners, the authorities started to uncover more and more about Sheila and her daughter Heather's relationship. They found out that between January 2004 and June 2013, the police were called to the family's home in Chicago 86 times. Most of the calls were to break up fights between Sheila and Heather. but some of the calls were much more intense. Heather was accused of locking her mom in a closet for hours. She was also accused of stealing thousands of dollars from her. According to Chicago police reports, Heather would often bite and hit her mom. In February 2011, the Oak Park police arrested Heather after pushing Sheila down the stairs so hard that Sheila's arm broke. Sheila told the police that after her daughter shoved her down the stairs, she then pulled the cords out of the phone to prevent her from calling 911. But most of these calls didn't end up in an arrest. Although Heather was verbally and physically abusive towards her mom, Sheila was almost always reluctant to file criminal charges against her daughter. Instead, she would often just call the police for her safety. But then when it came time to arrest Heather or press charges, Sheila almost always declined. In one particular police report taken in late 2012, Sheila refused to let police officers take a photograph of bruising to her arm that she claimed came from Heather biting her. She told the officers she knew her daughter needed help, but didn't think that throwing her in jail was the right kind of help that she needed. Local authorities in Chicago tried to convince Sheila to hospitalize Heather for her behavior, but Sheila wouldn't agree to that either. In many of the police reports, the officers wrote that no action was taken because, quote, both parties agreed to get along, end quote. According to the forensic pathologist in Bali, Sheila died from asphyxiation after a blunt force blow to her nose that blocked her airway. The pathologist also noted that another injury was found on Sheila's back that smashed one of her vertebrae. He also found several injuries to her left arm that were consistent with trying to defend herself from the blows. Sheila's body was flown back to the U.S. for a second autopsy at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. The American forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy agreed with the findings made in Bali. Sheila died from asphyxiation after having her nose broken. She also had several significant injuries to her face and head, alongside those defensive wounds on her arms. The American forensic pathologist agreed with Bali's authorities that Sheila was likely killed sometime between 3:00 a.m. and 8 a.m. on Tuesday. This was right after the St. Regis Hotel security cameras captured Sheila and Heather arguing in the hotel lobby. So they believed that after they argued, they went back to the hotel room where she was killed. In a public statement recorded by the Sydney Morning Herald, Bali Police Chief said, quote, "There is enough evidence, including CCTV footage, fingerprints, and items found at the murder scene, which all point to them as the perpetrators," end quote. The CCTV footage referred to has two videos. The first video is taken from inside the hotel lobby and shows Heather and her mom arguing. Now, I know you're wondering, how can you tell if two people are arguing simply by watching a video without sound? Well, the images captured on the footage corroborates what eyewitnesses told the police. A handful of hotel employees told authorities that they were in the hotel lobby at that time and that they overheard Sheila and Heather arguing at that exact moment when the video was taken. Then the second CCTV footage the police referred to is the video taken outside of the hotel. Security cameras outside of the St. Regis captured Tommy and Heather loading the suitcases inside the taxi when Sheila's body was found. The video then captured the couple turning around and going back inside the hotel. This video completely aligns with what the taxi driver's story was from that morning. Now, what about the fingerprints? The Bali police announced that Heather and Tommy's fingerprints were lifted from several key pieces of evidence, including the suitcase that contained Sheila's body. A bloody vase was found inside Sheila and Heather's hotel room, the room where the police believed the murder took place. Fingerprints were also found on a bloody glass ashtray and a bloody fruit bowl in the room. So, the police believed that these were the murder weapons. After 5 months of investigating, Indonesian prosecutors formally charged Heather and Tommy with premeditated murder. Throughout their entire investigation, Heather and Tommy were in police custody and considered prisoners under Indonesian law. Once someone is designated a prisoner, they're taken into custody for the police to finish their investigation. Once they complete the investigation, they turn it over to the prosecutor's office to decide whether or not to file charges. Now, the same thing happens here in the US, but this is a lot faster. Under the Indonesian legal system, the prosecutors didn't have to bring formal charges against Heather and Tommy for 5 long months, all while they remained in police custody. Keep in mind that Heather was almost 6 months pregnant with a baby girl. If found guilty of Sheila's murder, they both faced the death penalty, which, under Indonesian law, meant a firing squad. Less than 24 hours after formal murder charges were filed, Heather sued her uncle, William Weiss, to get access to her mom's $1.56 million estate to help pay for her defense in Bali. The lawsuit was filed in Cook County, Illinois, where the estate was founded. 3 months before her death, Sheila set up a special trust fund for, quote, health, support, education, and maintenance for Heather. Under the terms of the trust, in the event of Sheila's death, Heather's uncle, William Weiss, would be in charge of the trust until Heather turned 30. Once she turned 30, she could do whatever she wanted with the money. But just because Heather was the trust fund beneficiary doesn't mean that she automatically gets access to the money. She was considered the prime suspect in her mother's murder. Even if you're the beneficiary to an estate, you don't get it if you murdered the person who set it up. So when Sheila was murdered, her brother and Heather's uncle, William Weiss, said, no, I'm going to put this $1.56 million in a safe place. And let's let the trial play out and see what happens to Heather. But the Cook County judge disagreed with the uncle. On January 16, 2015, this judge ruled that Heather should have access to the estate in order to pay for her defense. Heather's attorney also tried to persuade the court to allow Heather to use some of the money for medical and legal fees related to her unborn baby. She asked the court for another $126,000 to cover these expenses. However, unlike the first request that allowed Heather to use the money for her own defense, the Cook County Court denied this request and said, no, the money can only be used for Heather's defense, not any expenses related to her unborn child. The trials against Heather and Tommy started in January 2015, while Heather was almost 7 months pregnant. They were tried separately in 2 different district courts in Bali. The trials were set to be heard in front of a 3-judge panel, not a jury. While in custody, they had only seen each other briefly before being transferred to the custody of the prosecutors. The prosecution argued that Heather and Tommy began plotting the murder way before setting foot in Bali. According to cell phone records, Heather sent Tommy a text message that asked him to hire a hitman to kill her mom for $50,000. The prosecution alleged that they wanted Sheila dead because she disapproved of their relationship. At one point, Sheila demanded that her daughter break up with Tommy and she wasn't allowed to see him anymore. The original plan, according to prosecutors, was to hire a hitman to kill Sheila for $50,000 before the trip to Bali. But once that plan didn't pan out, they came up with a backup plan. Sheila and Heather arrived in Bali on August 4th, 2014, and stayed in Kuta before going to the St. Regis Hotel, where they planned to stay until August 14th. Prosecutors alleged that while on the trip, Heather used her mom's credit card without her knowledge and purchased a one-way business class ticket from Chicago to Bali for her boyfriend, Tommy. She then used the same credit card again and booked a second room at the St. Regis Hotel for him. To Sheila's total surprise, Tommy arrived at the St. Regis on August 12th, and that's what sparked the fight in the hotel lobby. According to witnesses who saw the fight, Sheila came down to the lobby around 3:30 a.m. in a complete panic because she couldn't find Heather. Heather suddenly appeared in the lobby, standing side by side with Tommy. The manager of the St. Regis testified that Sheila became, quote, surprised and angry when she found out that Heather had used her credit card to book Tommy a room there. Witnesses said Sheila refused to pay for the room and told Heather that she was going to pursue fraud charges for her credit card company if Tommy didn't pay for the room himself. According to the prosecution's narrative, this was the last time Sheila was last seen alive. This is August 12th. After fighting in the lobby, Heather and Tommy exchanged more text messages between each other about murdering Sheila, like a plan to smother her with a pillow and then dump her body on the beach to make it look like a suicide. Sometime in the early morning hours of August 12th is when the prosecution said that they believed Heather and Tommy murdered Sheila. Prosecutors believed that Tommy was the actual killer, while Heather was the one who told him to do it. They believed that after that argument, Heather approached Tommy about killing her mom. She said, "This is it. We've talked about doing this. Let's kill her now." Tommy repeatedly struck Sheila over her head and face using that bloody fruit bowl and that bloody vase from inside the hotel room. During the fight, she tried to fight back, which explains the defensive wounds to her hands and arms. But she couldn't fight back. Finally, after being struck so hard that her nose broke, she couldn't breathe. Hotel security cameras captured both of them walking back and forth between their rooms and the hotel lobby. At one point, Tommy asked the front desk staff for a luggage cart and duct tape on one of the trips. After killing her, they wrapped her body in some of the hotel's bed sheets using duct tape. They then took her body and stuffed it inside of one of her suitcases. Around 12 o'clock noon, they tried checking out of the hotel. Before they checked out, hotel employees asked if they needed any help with the luggage, to which they answered no. On the way out to the taxis, a front desk manager asked about the bloodstains on one of the larger suitcases. Heather told the manager that it was simply a makeup stain. They then put the suitcase containing Sheila's body in the taxi's trunk. They also set 2 other bags in the back seat. Then, before going back into the hotel, they repeatedly told the hotel employees, "Do not touch the bags until they came back." Hotel security cameras captured them exiting the hotel through a different door and then scaling a wall behind it, crossing a road, and then hailing a taxi across the street. Heather and Tommy were then arrested the next day at a nearby budget hotel where they used their real names and Sheila's stolen credit card. When it came time for Heather and Tommy to tell their story, their version was slightly different. Heather testified in court that her mom got angry when she saw her and Tommy walk into the hotel lobby. She said she told her mom that Tommy was in Bali to study, but she didn't believe her and she got angry. She asked her mom if they could go back to the room to talk about it. She didn't want to talk about it. Sheila wanted Tommy to leave. Tommy testified that they went to the beach earlier that night to talk about how could they tell her mom that they were pregnant. They were expecting a baby together. They knew how she felt about Tommy, so they wanted to discuss what would be the best way to break the news. Cell phone records showed that they exchanged several text messages throughout the morning. According to Tommy, he went to Sheila's room after Heather sent him a text that she was scared, and she told him to, quote, bring something heavy. So believing that Heather was in trouble, he picked up a fruit bowl from his room and took it with him to Sheila and Heather's room. Both Heather and Tommy testified that Sheila, quote, flew into a rage after finding out about the pregnancy. According to both of them, Sheila grabbed a knife from inside the hotel room and threatened to kill the unborn baby. They said she called Heather a prostitute and called Tommy a racial slur. Tommy, for reference, is black. Heather and Tommy then said that Sheila put her arms around Tommy's neck and started choking him. They said she choked him for about 30 seconds. Then Tommy acted in self-defense. He said he took the fruit bowl he brought with him and struck Sheila over the head with it, only to get her to stop choking him. He said he hit her until he believed that she was unconscious, but not dead. He said he wasn't trying to kill her. He only wanted her to stop attacking him. Heather testified that she went to the bathroom while Tommy struck Sheila to go and hide. But she came out several minutes later to find Tommy trying to resuscitate her. According to both of them, they did try to call the police as well as the U.S. consulate, but in a panic, they came up with the idea of putting Sheila's body in a suitcase. Once inside the suitcase, they planned to drive her body to the U.S. consulate themselves. However, hotel security cameras showed the couple dropping the suitcase in a taxi and then leaving the hotel. A few weeks into testimony, the trials were suspended so that Heather could give birth. On March 17, 2015, Heather gave birth to a healthy baby girl in a hospital across the street from the jail. She was given the name Stella Schaefer. The trials resumed a few days later, only to be suspended again when Stella came down with jaundice. 2 weeks later, the trials resumed. This time seemed to give prosecutors some time to think about how they wanted to proceed. When the trials started again, prosecutors requested that the death penalty be taken off the table if the 3-judge panel convicted them. I mentioned earlier in the episode that a death sentence in Bali would mean execution by firing squad. Now, it's unclear why exactly the prosecution decided to ask the court for some leniency. Some people speculate that maybe it's because of their ages. Heather was only 18 years old at the time, and Tommy was only 21. Or maybe it's because of the baby. Some people thought that maybe the prosecutors didn't want to execute a new mom and a new dad. Whatever the reason for the prosecution's decision, they recommended a sentence of 15 years in prison for Heather and 18 years in prison for Tommy if they were convicted. Defense attorneys for Heather and Tommy also asked the court for leniency, citing that there was no evidence of premeditation and that they killed Sheila out of self-defense. After weeks of testimony and 2 delays, the 3-judge panel returned a verdict: guilty. The 3 judges found them both guilty of murder and sentenced Heather to 10 years in prison and Tommy to 18 years. In their ruling, the judges agreed with the prosecutors that the murder was premeditated and deliberate. However, they agreed with the defense that Heather was worthy of more leniency than Tommy because she had a new baby to care for, which, in their words, quote, will be very difficult to provide if the defendant has to be imprisoned for too long, end quote. Heather's defense attorney filed an appeal in Bali within days of the verdict. She also filed an emergency motion back in Chicago seeking additional money from her mother's trust to help pay for legal expenses. The The first time, the Cook County Court granted funds to help cover her criminal trial, which came out to be around $119,000, plus an additional couple thousand to cover Heather's food and medical expenses while in jail. Now, her attorney asked the court for more money to help pay for the appeal. In the emergency motion, her attorney asked for an additional $200,000. Heather's defense attorney told the court, quote, "He will continue to request Mac in the appeal process only if his fee is paid quickly and in one payment," end quote. And the he in that quote is referring to the defense attorney. But the Cook County judge overseeing the trust fund wasn't so quick to agree with the defense's motion. He told reporters that he, quote, "wouldn't be blackmailed," end quote. Instead of automatically releasing the money, he wouldn't release it until there was a hearing to determine if she was entitled to the trust fund money now that she's been convicted of her mother's murder. But of course, it's a different story about the money now because she's been convicted. Before, when it was just a decision whether or not to grant her some money to help pay for her defense, because before the conviction, she's still considered an innocent person. Now it's a completely different story. She's been convicted. Now, under Illinois law, a person who intentionally and unjustifiably caused the death of another person cannot receive property as a result of the death of that person, which in this case is her mother. If you thought this story was over, think again. Several months after the murder, in September 2015, police arrested Tommy's cousin, 24-year-old Robert Biggs, in Chicago. Prosecutors argued that in the minutes following the murder, Tommy and his cousin Robert exchanged incriminating text messages. In the text, Tommy told Robert, quote, "For some reason, I don't feel too bad," end quote. For the next 10 minutes, they exchanged messages about the murder. According to prosecutors, Robert helped and even coached his cousin on how best to get away with the murder. They also argued that text messages showed Robert was aware that Heather had asked Tommy to go find that hitman to kill her mom for $50,000 a few weeks earlier. Robert also advised and encouraged Tommy to go through with it. Chicago federal prosecutors charged him with one count of conspiracy to commit murder based on these text messages. Robert Biggs pleaded not guilty in federal court on October 29, 2015. But 14 months later, in December 2016, Robert accepted a deal with the prosecution where he agreed to plead guilty. In exchange, he received 9 years in prison for his role in Sheila's murder. Under Indonesian law, Heather's baby Stella was allowed to live with her in prison. So for the first 2 years of Stella's life on this earth, that's where she lived, in a Bali prison next to her mom. But in March 2017, Heather turned Stella over to an Australian woman. This was a woman who befriended Heather while in prison shortly after she was arrested. Throughout the trial, this woman and her husband continued to support Heather. So in 2017, they agreed to take care of her daughter until she was released from prison. But that might not happen anytime soon. After serving 7 years of her sentence, Heather was released from prison in Bali in October 2021. But the moment she arrived back in the U.S., she was taken back into custody. Now, 26 years old, Heather was arrested on conspiracy and obstruction charges related to her mother's murder. She's currently in a Chicago federal jail awaiting trial. Tommy Schaefer is currently serving his 18-year prison sentence in Bali, and it's unclear when he will be released. 6-year-old Stella is still in the custody of that Australian woman who took her in at 2 years old. In 2018, a Chicago court made its final deposition on the trust fund money that Sheila initially set up for Heather. Under this 2018 ruling, Stella is the only one entitled to the money, not Heather Mack. In August 2014, Heather and her boyfriend Tommy killed their mother so that they could be together. They thought they would get away with it by stuffing her body in a suitcase and running off. Instead, incriminating fingerprints belonging to Heather and Tommy were found on the suitcase and the murder weapon. You can lie, but forensics always tells the truth. Heather and Tommy's love created a gruesome scene. An image of a dead mother stuffed in a suitcase left never to be found. What kind of love is this? This isn't love, at least not my kind. It's pure evil greed. The type of greedy, fueled murder that should only live in movies and not in real life. To share your thoughts on the Heather Mack story, be sure to follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Forensic Tales. Do you think they received appropriate sentences for their roles in Sheila's murder? To find out what I think about the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode where I share my personal thoughts and opinions about the case. To check out photos from the case, be sure to head to our website, forensictales.com. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, consider leaving us a positive review or tell friends and family about us. You can also help support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Please join me next week. We'll have a brand new case and a brand new story to talk about. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell Areola. For a small monthly contribution, you can help create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing costs. In addition, for supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and snag exclusive show merchandise not available anywhere else. To learn about how you can support the show, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/forensictales, or simply click the support link in the show notes. You can also support the show by leaving a positive review or spreading the good word about us. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Nicole L., David B., Paula G., Selena C., Nicole G., Christine B., Karen D., Nancy H., and Jim C. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or send me an email at courtney@forensictales.com to find out how you can become involved. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you so much for listening. Your support means the world to me. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.
Before we get back to the episode, if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to tap 5 stars. It's one of the easiest ways to support Forensic Tales and helps the show reach new listeners. Thank you so much for being here.
To get this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. This episode of Forensic Tales is sponsored by Podcorn. When I first started looking for sponsors to feature on the show, it was really important to me that the brands I worked with were not only a good fit for me, but for my listeners. That's why I choose Podcorn to find sponsorships for Forensic Tales. Within just a couple short days, I found my first sponsorship, and since then, I found so many more. Podcorn is a marketplace connecting podcasters to amazing podcast sponsorship opportunities, such as host-read ads, interview segments, topical discussions, and more. And because I'm a one-woman show, I need to be able to quickly and efficiently share with you trusted products and services. I just don't have the time to search the dark corners of the internet for trusted sponsors. With Podcorn, there is no middleman, which I love. Podcasters of all sizes can browse and choose opportunities right there on the platform, set their own rates, and collaborate with brands directly. To learn more about what Podcorn can do for you and your podcast, click the link in my show notes to sign up to Podcorn and start browsing today.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
In 1999, a teenager stumbled into Hong Kong's police department, telling police officers she'd been having nightmares about a woman who had been kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. Officers followed the young teenager back to her apartment number 31 on Granville Road. Upon entering the 5-bedroom apartment, officers were immediately hit by the scent of decomposition. But the scent wasn't the only thing officers noticed about the place. The entire apartment was filled with Hello Kitty decor. There was Hello Kitties everywhere. The walls, the decorations, even the furniture was Hello Kitty. More disturbing than the decor was what police officers found inside of one of those Hello Kitty dolls. A woman's skull had been sewn inside the head of a Hello Kitty mermaid doll. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 57, The Hello Kitty Murder. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast that covers real, bone-chilling true crime stories with a forensic science twist. Some of the cases have been solved by a little help of forensic science, while others have turned cold. The stories we cover each week send a chilling reminder that not all stories have happy endings. If you're interested in supporting the show and getting early access to weekly episodes, bonus material, ad-free episodes, merchandise, and more, consider visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/forensictales. Another great way you can help support the show is by leaving us a positive rating with a review. Now, let's jump right into this week's story. Hi, everyone. Happy February, and welcome to this week's episode of Forensic Tales. In case you missed it in last week's episode, we have a bonus episode right now up on our Patreon page. The episode covers the Lisa Montgomery story. For many, many years, Lisa was the only female prisoner on federal death row right here in the U.S. And just a couple weeks ago, from the time of this recording, she was executed. She became the first person executed in 2021 right here in the U.S. So that bonus episode is up right now on our Patreon page. If you sign up, you'll get instant access to not only this episode, but you'll also get instant access to all of the other bonus content. The case we're covering this week was sent into the show by one of our very own listeners. If there's a case or a story that you'd like covered and talked about here on the show, I always love to get your suggestions, and I always try to do my very best to cover it on a future episode. So if you'd like to submit a case, you can go to our website, forensictales.com, or connect with the show on Instagram or Facebook at Forensic Tales. And you can submit your story, and I promise that I will do my very, very best to cover it. I'm really excited to be talking about this week's story with you. It's a case that I had never heard of before a listener sent it in. And it's a case that is equally fascinating as it is horrifying. And full disclosure, there are a lot of very graphic, very horrifying details about this story. And to be completely honest with you, I've left out a lot of the details because it's just too graphic to even share on the show. We're talking about the case that's become known as the Hello Kitty murder. And it's one where the forensics failed. The forensic pathology failed. If the forensic pathologist could have been able to determine the exact cause of death, then this story would have had a completely different outcome even all of these years later. In May of 1999, a young 14-year-old girl made her way into the Hong Kong police station. The girl opened the front door to the station and slowly walked up to the front desk. The police officer who was assigned working the front desk could noticeably tell that something was really, really wrong with this girl. She looked scared. She looked frightened. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. The Hong Kong police officer asked the girl what was wrong, what she needed police assistance for. The girl told the police officer she needed help. She needed help from the police. The officer says, "Okay, but I need to know exactly what's wrong. What do you need the police for?" At first, the officer is thinking, okay, maybe this girl is a runaway. She's run away from her parents, and now she needs some help. Or maybe she's lost. Maybe she's on vacation and is completely lost and needs some help finding her mom and dad. But that's not what the girl needed help for. The girl told the police officer that for the past couple weeks, she'd been having nightmares. That her nightmares have been filled with the ghost of a young woman. The young woman had been bound and gagged with electrical tape. She had nightmares night after night, watching this woman be tortured, murdered, and decapitated. The officer behind the front desk is looking around like, did this girl really come all the way down to the police station just to tell us she needs the police because she's been having some nightmares? The officer's first thought was, okay, this must be a practical joke. That this was a teenage girl simply playing a joke on them, just like some other teenagers might do. He even thought maybe she was on drugs. A quick search on the computer revealed that this very girl had a record of being associated with gang members after she ran away from her parents' home just the year before. So he completely shrugs her off. He tells her, "Look, girl, I'm sorry you're having nightmares, but there's nothing the police can do about it. Maybe try watching or listening to something happy before you go to bed at night. But get out of here. We've got some real police work to do here that doesn't involve trying to solve your nightmare problems." But the girl continued to stand there. And after a few minutes of complete silence between her and the officer, she told the police officer that she was the one responsible for killing the woman in her dreams, that she was one of her killers. After several moments of silence, the kind of silence that you could hear a pin drop. The police officer thought that maybe this isn't a practical joke, that maybe this girl wasn't playing a joke on them after all. Maybe she was telling the truth. So a couple Hong Kong police officers followed the 14-year-old girl back to a flat a couple miles away. After the girl opened the front door to apartment number 31 on Granville Road to let the police officers inside, officers spotted an oversized Hello Kitty doll with a decapitated skull of a woman inside of it. The officers quickly realized that this girl's dreams were actual nightmares. Over 2 decades before that 14-year-old girl walked into the Hong Kong police station in May 1999, Fan Man Yi was born in 1976 to Chinese parents. Right before the start of her life, her childhood was troubled. When Fan was just a toddler, her parents abandoned her, and she was forced to grow up in a girls' home in Hong Kong. By the time Fan became a teenager, she was already abusing drugs and alcohol. With no real guidance in her life, she really had nowhere else to turn. She had no role models, no parent figures around telling her what's acceptable behavior and what isn't. So, as a teenager who was left completely unsupervised and practically abandoned at a very young age, she turned to drugs and alcohol. But using drugs and alcohol costs money. They don't come free. So in order to keep up with her drug and drinking habit, Fan needed to find a way to make some money so she could continue this lifestyle of hers. And that's when she turned to sex work. She became a prostitute. Unfortunately, this is all too common. Many young women who become addicted to drugs often turn to sex work in order to feed their addiction. Prostitution becomes this quick way to make several $100s, sometimes more, in a single night's work. Then they take the money and turn around and pay their drug dealers, or sometimes they perform these acts in exchange for the drugs themselves. So Fan started prostituting for drug money when she was just a teenager. Remember, she's got no parents around, no one really checking in on her, and she found that sex work could support her drug habit. When Fan turned 23 years old, she landed a legitimate job working as a hostess at a local nightclub. At this point in her life, she was starting to get tired of using drugs. She knew her drug addiction was destroying her life and was starting to look for a way to get out of this lifestyle. So the job at the nightclub became sort of her way out. This was the first time in her entire life that she had a legitimate job, and she was just about ready to stop working as a sex worker. At the age of 23, she was really trying to turn her life around. She wanted something better than the life she was living addicted to drugs. In 1996, things started to look up for Fan, even if it was just for a moment. She was newly married and gave birth to a son. But Fan's relationship with her new husband was rocky, to put it lightly. They were both addicted to drugs, and their neighbors were constantly calling the police, reporting domestic abuse from their apartment. But still, her marriage and her son provided some sort of light to Fan's life, no matter how dim that light really was. In early 1997, while Fan was working as a hostess at the nightclub, that's when she met 34-year-old Chan Mon-lok. Even though Fan was working at the nightclub, she still held on to her work as a sex worker. She still needed that extra money to not only bring in for her family, but she couldn't stop using drugs. So, meeting Chan was convenient. Chan just so happened to be a local pimp, and he was a drug dealer. Chan even had his own group of sex workers who worked for him, and he would pimp the girls out. And this was something that interested Fan. She saw this as an opportunity to get additional clients as a sex worker and also have a drug dealer on speed dial. So quickly after meeting at the nightclub, Fan joined Chan's group of girls. She became one of his sex workers. But Chan wasn't just a pimp to Fan. He also personally paid her for sex, something that I guess was pretty common within this group. Now, on March 17th, 1999, Fan was completely out of money. She was broke. She had already spent all of her money from her last paycheck at the nightclub. She didn't have any money left from her sex work, and she was desperate. She needed drug money, and she needed it now. That's when she came up with a plan. After Fan visited with Chan for one of their, quote, business deals, Fan waited for Chan to leave the room, and that's when she stole his wallet, containing $2,000 in Chinese currency, which in US dollars at the time equated to just about $2,600. Fan knew that stealing money from her pimp and drug dealer was a really, really risky move. This was really dangerous. But she was desperate. She was completely broke, and she needed her next fix. So when Fan found out that his wallet and cash were missing, he was furious. And he had no question as to who stole it. He knew it was Fan. They had just been together. There was no one else who had access to where his wallet was. And once Chan found out his wallet was gone and then believed that Fan was the one who stole it, she quickly paid the money back, plus interest. She didn't even deny taking the wallet. She admitted to it. She returned it and even threw in some extra couple $100. But Chan wasn't happy with just being repaid the money she stole plus a couple $100. He wanted more. He wanted to make Fan pay for what she did. In Chan's mind, Fan hadn't repaid her debt to him. After Fan left that apartment, Chan enlisted the help of 27-year-old Liang Xing Cho, 21-year-old Liang Weilun. Also with them was Chan's 13-year-old girlfriend. Yes, 13. And their plan was to kidnap Fan from her apartment and prostitute her out until they felt like she had paid off her debt, even though she had already returned the money that she stole within minutes. She gave Chan back the wallet. But Chan wanted more. And in his mind, she was going to have to work to pay it off. On the night of March 17th, 1999, Chan, with his two accomplices and his 13-year-old girlfriend, left Chan's 5-bedroom apartment and headed towards Fan's apartment. Once they arrived, they kidnapped her and took her back to Chan's. This would be the moment that Fan realized she made the biggest mistake of her life by stealing that cash. Now more than ever, we need to take care of our physical and mental health. Right now, more than 125,000 Americans die from overdose and suicide every single year. To create change and stop the stigma around mental health, I highly recommend you subscribe and listen to the podcast, Choose Your Struggle. Hosted by Jay Schiffman, Choose Your Struggle discusses issues of mental health, substance misuse, drug use, and policy. Not only does Jay discuss these important issues, he also chats with some incredible guests who seek to destroy the stigma of these topics and create real, open conversations to bring about change. To join this very important conversation, subscribe and listen to Choose Your Struggle. Download today wherever you get your podcasts. That's Choose Your Struggle. What exactly happened over the next month to this day remains a mystery. But what we do know is that Chan and his two friends, along with his seriously underage girlfriend, took Fan back to his apartment. The 5-bedroom apartment had mostly been used by Chan for drug and gang-related activities. It wasn't really a legitimate place to live. But one of the unique parts of the apartment was that Hello Kitty decor practically made up the entire place. I mean, every single part of this huge 5-bedroom apartment was covered in all things Hello Kitty. Hello Kitty walls, Hello Kitty furniture, Hello Kitty dolls were everywhere. It was pretty much the only thing inside of that apartment. I think we all remember Hello Kitty from some part of our lives. I know for me, it was really big when I was a kid. I remember going to the mall with my mom, and we would go into the Sanrio store. And what's really weird is that I remember buying those multicolored pens, you know, the ones where at the top there was like 10 different colors and you just slid your thumb down and picked out which color you wanted to use. And I also remember buying gum that they had. And I also remember that for one of my birthdays, I don't know how old I was, but for one of my birthdays, I got a Hello Kitty phone for my bedroom. It was my first landline phone I had for my room. And I remember being very, very excited about this Hello Kitty phone. Now, something that I don't think many people know is that even though Hello Kitty was created in Japan, the character itself was actually designed to be a British doll. This was because Japanese people at the time were obsessed with foreign countries. So Hello Kitty was designed as this British doll, but ultimately, of course, became this signature icon of Japanese culture. And the Hello Kitty phenomenon quickly moved to the United States. It moved just about 2 years after it was designed in 1976. And by 2018, was worth a whopping $42 billion here. The Hello Kitty empire is huge, and it was clearly even bigger in Hong Kong during the late 1990s. So back at Chan's apartment, the Hello Kitty apartment, the 4 of them, high on meth, started to beat Fan. Their plan of simply kidnapping her and prostituting her out in exchange for what she did by stealing the wallet seemed to have escalated, and they started beating her. And when the beatings didn't seem to satisfy them, they began torturing her. They knew their plan of prostituting her out was completely out the window because they had already beaten her so bad. She was completely covered in cuts, bruises, marks all over her body. There was no way she'd make it as a sex worker. So they thought, why not just torture her? The 3 men would do meth, go beat and torture Fan for a while, go back, get a little more high, then come back and continue the beatings. They would often leave the apartment, go to nightclubs, go to bars, go out, come back the next morning, and then beat her. This went on and on and on, not just for days, but for weeks. Over the next 4 weeks, so over the course of an entire month, Fan was brutally tortured by these 3 men, while Chan's 13-year-old girlfriend stood by inside of the apartment. Even though we don't know all the details of what happened to Fan, but the events we do know are bone-chilling. The men would take fire and hot melted plastic to her bare skin. They kept her tied up where they would take turns raping her. Some of the things they did to her are straight out of the worst horror films and are what nightmares are really made of. They're things that I can't even describe here, many of which are widely available on the internet if you do a quick Google search. So sometime in mid-April 1999, Fan passed away inside that apartment after about a month of torture. One night, the 3 men went out to the nightclub, returned back to the apartment the following morning, and discovered Fan dead. It's entirely unclear what exactly caused her death, what was happening in the moments before she died. And this is something that's going to become the very center of this case. After her death, the 3 men moved her body into the bathroom. And full disclosure, this is when things get even more graphic. I'm not going to share every little detail because, in my opinion, it's so horrendous. But once they took her into the bathroom, they knew they needed to get rid of the body. So they took a saw and started to dismember her body. And the entire process took over 10 hours. The 3 men then boiled multiple pieces of her body to avoid decomposition. And then they stuck other body pieces in trash bags where they were just taken out with the rest of the trash. Chan ordered his 2 friends to remove most of Fan's skin and place her muscles and some of her organs inside the refrigerator in the apartment. But the one part of Fan's body that they saved for last was her head. The men boiled her head on the stove in some water and then sewed her skull inside the head of an oversized Hello Kitty mermaid doll. And that's where she remained for the next month. This is where we get back to May 1999, where the episode began with that 14-year-old girl telling police officers about the nightmares she was having about a woman and how they followed her to the apartment and discovered the Hello Kitty doll containing a human skull. The Hello Kitty doll belonged to Chan, and the human skull inside Hello Kitty was Fan. And the 14-year-old who turned herself into police was Chan's teenage girlfriend who was there the entire time. Chan, his 2 accomplices, along with his teenage girlfriend, were all arrested by Hong Kong police. And pretty quickly after the arrests were made, prosecutors approached Ah Fong, the teenage girlfriend, about giving her complete immunity in the case. They wanted to grant her immunity, partially because of her age compared to the rest of them. They were in their 20s, close to 30, and she was just a teenager, 13, 14. But they also wanted to grant her immunity in the case because they knew that if they granted her complete immunity, she would testify against Chan, as well as the other 2 men involved. Ah Fong was very cooperative with police. after she received immunity in the murder, she told police everything. She provided them with all the details about the night Fan was kidnapped from her apartment, and she provided the gruesome details about the torture she experienced for over a month before she died. Many of the details that I can't even cover on the show because of how gruesome and how graphic they are. Ah Feng was very important for this investigation. She was the one eyewitness to everything. She saw it all. Everything seemed to be a pretty open and shut case until the trial got started. After police granted Ah Feng, Chan's teenage girlfriend, complete immunity in Fan's murder, Chan and his two accomplices pled not guilty to all charges and went to trial. This case became a media sensation, not only in China, but also over here in the States. It was dubbed the Hello Kitty murder. The torture and murder of Fan was one of the most brutal, most heinous crimes Hong Kong had ever seen. Hong Kong, although it be crowded, is a relatively safe place to live. So when the details about the dubbed Hello Kitty murder came out, the details were really shocking for people. Nobody could really believe something so cruel, so callous could happen to someone. So the murder trial against Chan and his two accomplices began in November 2000. Over the course of the 6-week trial, jurors learned all about Fan's kidnapping, torture, and ultimate murder. One of the biggest star witnesses for the prosecution was Chan's teenage girlfriend, who was inside the apartment the entire time. And she didn't spare any detail, no matter how gruesome. She told the jurors all about the things these 3 men did to the victim, and all the details about the great lengths they went to in order to dismember and to dispose of the body, how the process took them over 10 hours to complete. She even told the jury that when she let police back to the apartment, how they found her head sewn into the Hello Kitty doll and how Fan's organs were still inside of the refrigerator. It seemed like this was a pretty much open and shut type of case, especially after the girlfriend took the stand to testify against all 3 men. But the problem for the prosecution began when the forensic evidence was presented by the forensic pathologist about how Fan died. Now, there wasn't a question that Fan was dead. The question for the forensic pathologist was, how did she die? Now, the cause and manner of death is really important to any murder trial. Jurors want a forensic pathologist to clearly explain to them what caused a person's death and what the manner of death was. If someone is on trial for stabbing someone to death, a jury wants a forensic pathologist to say yes, the manner of death was homicide and the cause of death was multiple stab wounds. The manner of death is important. Was this person's death ruled a suicide, homicide, accident? Was it by natural causes? Or is it undetermined and we don't have a manner of death? So at trial, the forensic pathologist wasn't able to clearly define to the jury what Fan's cause of death was. The manner of death is the determination of how the injury or disease led to death. But the cause of death is the specific injury or disease. For example, manner of death is suicide. Cause of death is a single gunshot wound to the head. In Fan's case, the forensic pathologist couldn't provide enough evidence as to what Fan's exact cause of death was. The jury knows that she died, and they know what happened to her after she died based on the girlfriend's testimony, but not knowing what exactly caused her death was, well, problematic. Not even Chan's girlfriend could testify to what injury Fan may have sustained right before her death. The girlfriend claims that they all left the apartment one night, and when they returned the next morning, Fan was dead. So this left things kind of wide open. Was she technically murdered by one of these men? Did she somehow manage to take her own life to end the torture? Was she also given drugs and maybe overdosed? No one knew. Even the forensic pathologist assigned to the case didn't know how Fan died. The forensic pathologist didn't even really have a body. They had some of her organs that were stuffed in the refrigerator. They found a couple of her teeth in the apartment and her skull from the Hello Kitty doll. But that's it. These men had done, I hate to say it, but they had done a pretty good job of disposing every other part of Fan's body that could be helpful when determining a cause or a manner of death. And what they had just wasn't enough for forensics to really be able to tell what caused Fan's death, except for the fact that, yes, she's dead. So what started as a completely open and shut type murder trial became the exact opposite. Even though police recovered several of Fan's body parts inside the apartment, all containing the DNA of all three men, Chan's defense was that Fan died of an overdose inside of the apartment. He claimed that she was doing drugs, just like the rest of them, and that when they left the apartment one night, she must have overdosed on her own, ultimately causing her death. Now, you and I might sit here, listen to that, and not believe one word coming out of his mouth. But the jury was really troubled by the testimony from the forensic pathologist and all the evidence that was presented about Fan's death, or I should say the lack of such forensic evidence. So after 6 weeks of testimony and then deliberation, the jury came back with a verdict that shocked everyone throughout Hong Kong. After the trial concluded, the jury convicted the three men of manslaughter, not murder. The jury ruled that the remains weren't sufficient evidence to show whether Fan was murdered or if she had died some other way, like a drug overdose, as Chan claimed. The jury explained that they couldn't come to a unanimous decision on whether the men intended to kill Fan or not, which, if they intended to kill her, would have meant they would be sentenced to a mandatory life sentence and they would have been found guilty of murder, not manslaughter. The jury did, however, believe that Fan did die as a result of these three men's actions, but their intent wasn't to kill her, which means manslaughter, a much lesser charge, not murder. In December 2000, all three men were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. This is a big distinction because had they been convicted of murder, they would have received life sentence with no possibility of parole. This essentially means that as of 2020, as of last year, from the time of recording this episode, these 3 men are eligible for parole right this very moment. And this decision left many people throughout Hong Kong reeling. They were furious with this jury's verdict and the judge sentences of these men. The brutality, the callousness, the torture was nothing like they had ever witnessed before. Now, nobody argued that Fan's life was perfect, but everyone agreed that she didn't deserve what happened to her at the hands of these men. And the people of Hong Kong were really let down by forensic science. Because her body had been so brutally mutilated, and what was left wasn't enough to determine a proper manner or cause of death. The forensic evidence is what led to 3 men getting off with manslaughter instead of murder. As of 2021, all 3 men responsible for Fan's kidnapping, torture, and murder are all still behind bars. But because of their sentences, they are currently eligible for parole anytime after last year. Now, it's completely unknown whether or not these men will ever be paroled, whether any parole board will ever grant them their freedom back. The Hello Kitty murder has been dubbed one of the most brutal murders Hong Kong has ever seen. The details of this case, when it comes to the torture that Fan experienced before her murder, many of which couldn't even be described in my show, are exactly what nightmares are made of. You read the details about her torture and murder, and it's unlike anything you'll ever read. You probably won't even be able to sleep that night. It's almost indescribable. The Hello Kitty murder will be a case that will continue to haunt some of Hong Kong's own residents. After the murder, and well after the trial and conviction, to no surprise, landlords had some trouble finding any new tenants for that apartment where the Hello Kitty murder happened. So the entire building was ultimately demolished in September 2012, and in 2016 was turned into a hotel. Even though the building itself was demolished, the Hello Kitty murder will forever be remembered as one of Hong Kong's most brutal murders. To check out photos from this week's case, visit our website, forensictales.com. If you'd like to share your thoughts and opinions on the Hello Kitty murder, connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Forensic Tales. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Don't forget, if there's a case you'd like covered on Forensic Tales, submit your suggestions on social or on our website, forensictales.com. Join me next week for a brand new case, a brand new story. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. For a small monthly contribution, you can gain access to bonus content and be one of the first to listen to new episodes. Or, if you simply want to support the show, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/forensictales. You can also help support the show by leaving us a positive review and telling friends and family about us. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Nicole L., William R., David B., Katrina G., Sammy, and Paula. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head to our Patreon page to find out how you can become involved. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Please join me next week We release a new episode every Monday. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.